You meet someone new today, you extend your hand, they take it. 2 seconds, maybe three, then you let go and move on with your day. You don't think about it. Why would you? It's just a handshake. But the real answer is far stranger. That gesture didn't start in a boardroom. It didn't start with a business deal or a diplomatic treaty. It started millions of years ago in the dirt between animals who had every reason to kill each other and needed a way to say they wouldn't. Think about what a hand actually is. It's the part of your body built to hold a weapon, to throw a spear, to grip a rock. For most of human history, an open hand near a stranger's face was not a friendly gesture. It was a risk. Your ancestors knew this instinctively, the same way you know not to turn your back on a dog that's growling. So, how did the most dangerous part of the body become the go to symbol of trust? Start with your closest living relatives, chimpanzees. Primatologist Frans de Waal spent decades watching them, and he noticed something that looked almost human. After a fight, two chimps don't just walk away and sulk. They reach toward each other, they touch hands. Sometimes they hold on, sometimes they groom the fur along the arm, but the contact matters more than the words ever could, because there are no words. Touch is the whole sentence. Duvall called this reconciliation behavior, and it showed up again and again across species. A hand extended after conflict, a hand held to signal that the fight is over. This wasn't culture, this was biology, running underneath culture long before either species built a single tool. Now fast forward. Your ancestors are standing upright. Their hands are free, and free hands change everything, because a free hand can carry a spear, but it can also carry nothing at all. An empty, open hand became a signal. Look, it says, no weapon, no blade, nothing hidden in my palm. This is one of the oldest theories behind the handshake, and it's disarmingly literal. You weren't shaking hands to be polite. You were proving you weren't about to kill someone. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual physical function of the gesture. Here's where it gets stranger. Neuroscientist Noam Sobel, working out of the Weizmann Institute, ran an experiment that most people have never heard of, and once you hear it, you will never shake a hand the same way again. His team filmed hundreds of strangers meeting for the first time, shaking hands, then walking away. They weren't looking at faces, they were looking at hands. And what they found is that people, without noticing it, bring the hand they just shook up toward their own face. They sniff it. You read that correctly? Sobel's research found that after a handshake, people unconsciously raise the shaken hand toward their nose far more often than they raise the hand that wasn't touched. It happens in a fraction of a second. It happens whether the greeting was warm or cold. Your ancestors didn't just want to see a stranger's hand. On some buried level, they wanted to smell it. Why would smell matter? Because for most of your evolutionary history, scent was information. It told you about health, about hormones, about whether this was a body worth trusting. Long before humans had language sophisticated enough to lie convincingly, the nose was doing a version of a background check. So a handshake was never one signal, it was three, stacked on top of each other, and you inherited every layer without knowing it. The first layer says, this hand holds no weapon. The second layer says, this contact means we are not fighting, the same reconciliation gesture your primate ancestors used after conflict. And the third layer, the one almost nobody talks about, is chemical, a brief exchange of scent disguised as a gesture of politeness, running quietly underneath a custom that feels perfectly modern. Now think about how strange that is. In a glass office tower, 40 floors up, two strangers in tailored suits shake hands before signing a contract worth millions of dollars. They believe they are performing a civilized ritual, and in some sense they are. But underneath the suits and the small talk, their bodies are still running code written for a world with no roofs, no doors, and no certainty that the person in front of you wasn't about to attack. Go back further, and you find the gesture already written into stone. Ancient Greek carvings show two figures clasping hands, a custom called dexiosis, often carved onto tombs to show a bond that death itself couldn't sever. The Romans had their own version, sometimes gripping not just hands but forearms, a firmer hold that made it harder to conceal a blade up the sleeve. Historians still debate the exact origins, but the pattern is unmistakable. Every culture that left behind art or writing seems to have independently arrived at the same solution: open hand, mutual grip, proof of peace. That's the part that should stop you. Civilizations separated by oceans with no contact, no shared language, and no shared history all landed on nearly identical gestures. That's not a coincidence you can explain with culture alone. That's a signal so useful, so deeply wired into how bodies negotiate trust, that it kept getting reinvented from scratch. Quakers in 17th century England leaned on it even harder. While the aristocracy around them bowed and doffed hats to signal rank, Quakers refused those hierarchical gestures on principle. Everyone was equal before God, so everyone got the same greeting. A handshake and nothing more. It was almost a political statement disguised as a courtesy, a way of saying that no one in the room outranked anyone else. That version of the gesture, stripped of hierarchy, is largely the one that survived into the modern office. This is where anthropologist Robin Dunbar's work becomes useful. Dunbar spent years studying primate social bonds, and he found that grooming, physical touch between group members, wasn't just hygiene. It was social glue. Chimps groom each other for hours, not because their fur is that dirty, but because touch releases a cascade of chemicals in the brain that lower stress and build trust. Dunbar argued that as human groups grew too large for everyone to groom everyone, language evolved partly to replace that function. But language never fully replaced touch, it just made touch faster. A 3-second handshake does in an instant what an hour of grooming used to do for a chimpanzee. That's the trade your species made: efficiency for depth. A quick, safe substitute for something that used to take real time and real vulnerability. And that trade still shapes decisions you'd swear were purely rational. Management researcher Greg Stewart at the University of Iowa studied job interviews and found something uncomfortable. Candidates who gave a firmer, more confident handshake were rated as more hireable, independent of what they actually said in the interview. Interviewers insisted their decisions were based on qualifications, on resumes, on answers to careful questions. But the data told a different story. A few seconds of grip strength were quietly steering judgments that people believed were entirely about merit. That should unsettle you a little. An entire hiring process built on logic, credentials, and structured questions can still be nudged by a gesture your ancestors were using before spoken language existed. You'd like to think you evaluate people with your mind. Increasingly, it looks like you evaluate them with your palm, and your body still knows the difference. Ever notice how a limp handshake feels vaguely unsettling, even if you can't say why? Or how a handshake held a half second too long makes your skin prickle? You're not imagining that discomfort. You're running an ancient threat assessment, the same one your ancestors ran before they had a word for trust. Consider what happens when the gesture goes wrong. Someone grips too hard. Something in you tenses. Some ancient part of your brain flags a possible threat, even though you know, consciously, that this is just a business meeting. Someone's hand is cold, or clammy, or won't quite meet the grip, and you find yourself, unfairly perhaps, trusting them just a little less. None of this is written down anywhere. Nobody teaches you the rules of a handshake in school, and yet you already know them, the way you already know how to flinch. Here's the twist that makes this stranger still. During the pandemic, hundreds of millions of people stopped shaking hands almost overnight. Elbow bumps, waves, nods, and it felt wrong to nearly everyone. Not because the alternatives were rude, but because something ancient in the exchange was suddenly missing. People reported feeling less connected to strangers, harder to read, harder to trust, in ways that were difficult to articulate and impossible to fully replace with a gesture from across a 6-foot gap. That reaction wasn't etiquette breaking down. That was millions of years of primate reconciliation behavior suddenly being denied its outlet, and your nervous system noticing, even when your conscious mind didn't know why. Some researchers who study touch and social bonding noted a strange side effect during those months. Reports of loneliness climbed, and not only among people who lived alone. Even people surrounded by coworkers, neighbors, and family described feeling oddly disconnected, unable to name exactly why a video call with a familiar face still left them feeling distant. Take away the handshake, the hug, the passing touch on the shoulder, and you don't just lose a custom. You lose the fastest, oldest channel your species ever built for saying, without words, I see you, and you are safe here. Compare that to a video call. You can see a face in perfect detail, hear every word clearly, and still walk away feeling like nothing quite landed. That gap is the ghost of every gesture evolution built long before screens existed. Sound and image alone were never enough. Your ancestors needed contact, weight, warmth, and yes, even scent to fully believe the message being sent. This is also why a handshake between old friends feels different from one between strangers. With a stranger, the gesture is doing threat assessment, running the ancient checklist: no weapon, no aggression, acceptable risk. With someone you already trust, the same motion becomes almost ceremonial, a small ritual confirmation of a bond that both people already know is solid. The mechanics are identical. The meaning shifts entirely based on history, the same way a chimpanzee's touch means something different after a fight than it does during casual grooming. So the next time you meet someone and extend your hand, notice what's actually happening. You are proving, in the oldest language your body knows, that your hand holds no weapon. You are performing a reconciliation gesture your ancestors used after violence, now used before any violence has even had the chance to start. And somewhere beneath your awareness, your nose is quietly gathering information your conscious mind will never admit to needing. You didn't invent trust. You inherited it, folded into a gesture so small and so automatic that you stopped noticing it centuries ago. Tonight, when you meet someone new, you'll probably extend your hand without thinking twice about it.